Russian oligarchs, West African elites, and anonymous owners of private corporations. These are among the top home buyers of Canadian real estate, according to a report from Transparency International, with most transactions missing information about the purchasers or the origins of the funds and being done in cash. Our next guest says housing across Canada is vulnerable to, quote, dirty money. James Cohen, Executive Director, Transparency International Canada, joins us. Thanks so much for being with us.
Well, thanks for having me.
So this idea, this notion has been around for some time, those critical of the rise of the Canadian housing market. But your analysis actually sought to put numbers to it and to look at to what extent this kind of dirty money, as you call it, could be driving prices. How did you do your analysis?
Yeah, well, we managed to get access to data from TerraNet, which holds all property or mortgage registries within Ontario. And we analyzed 1.4 million transactions from 2008 to 2018. And we reviewed those as to which are corporate purchases, which are individual purchases, and which had mortgages by regulated lenders and unregulated. What we couldn't find out within this information, like our last report in 2016 about Vancouver, is are there nominees or trustees buying houses for somebody? So that's one piece of information that is missing.
But what did it show you in that analysis?
Well, basically what we found out is that Toronto matches a number of other major markets around the world, like New York, Vancouver, London, or Miami, in that top-end real estate is being purchased either by companies, which isn't illegal in and of itself, and some of them aren't even anonymous, but a lot of them are skirting regulations by going through unregulated lenders or purchasing in cash, and it steadily rises as the value in property goes up.
Just to clarify, because there were a lot of big, sexy headlines around your report, and I wanted to get some thoughts from some of our regular guests. I'll name them, people like John Passalis, who comes on a lot, and Peter Norman, who come out, who both would love to see more transparency around housing. The issues they took with your report are largely tied to the idea that if you look at a 10-year period of transactions in a market like Toronto and you base it on the value of all homes, and they concluded, based on your findings, that we're talking about 4% of transactions, that the total value doesn't represent the total number of, like, it's more like maybe half of that would be the deals. And then if it's a company that is behind the purchase, sometimes there are local entrepreneurs or investors who want to put their money to work in the real estate market. Sure, it could be someone from Russia or some other part of the world, but there's also a lot of people in the GTA that saw a great opportunity to make money through a holding company in real estate, which sort of begs the question, is this really an issue? Is this really a problem that has driven up home prices, or are these numbers actually kind of small? Should that be the conclusion?
Basically, this report was a risk assessment. Yeah. So we didn't actually say there is X amount of money that's dirty money. And basically, law enforcement for a long time in Canada hasn't really turned our attention to money laundering. And even in the budget last week, the federal budget, a lot of focus was on BC. What this report is showing is that it's not just a Vancouver problem. Toronto is also open to it, because these are regulations that affect all of Canada. Now, on the numbers themselves, yeah, it could be a smaller number than the overall 4% that we're seeing, but still, that's a large amount of money from overseas or even within Canada that could be dirty money. And within a particular neighborhood, that money could be driving up prices, especially if we look into the luxury condo market. That space that's being taken up, that in a city where we're seeing housing crunches, could be used for people that actually want to live here.
Like, for those who say, why don't we know? Why isn't there more transparency? What do you say to that?
Basically, our laws on who is the true owner of a company are very lax in Canada. Transparency International has criticized Canada, and so has the FATF, an international oversight body. And basically, we don't have a corporate registry in place for private companies to show who is the true owner of a company. And even at that, at a provincial level, provinces don't require the beneficial ownership information to be on land titles. So British Columbia is putting legislation in place for that.
There were a number of initiatives to implement foreign buyers tax. If you don't know if the buyer is foreign, because as you said, sometimes you can get away with not disclosing that, how effective has that been, or is it difficult to measure?
It's difficult to measure because of that very reason. Somebody can just be a nominee for an overseas buyer, or they can put in trustee or open up a...
Are there marketplaces for that?
Yeah, there are. Canada is being advertised. So when the Panama Papers were broken out and more investigation was done into them, Canadian journalists found that the intermediaries at the heart of the Panama Papers were selling Canada to their clients through snow washing. Basically, take your dirty money from overseas and put it in Canada, and it will be cleaned like the pure white snow. And there's other companies around the world that are advertising Canadian limited partnerships.
So if people want to try to find out more about what's happening in their neighborhood, what are some of the steps by which you can find? I mean, everyone's always trying to get a pulse on their local real estate, and because it's hard to get around the numbers, everyone just reaches these sort of intangible conclusions on, oh, that's going on or that's going on. What are some of the steps you can take?
Well, we had to go through Terranet to get the data, which you do have to purchase the data, so it's not easily accessible. It wasn't easily accessible for us. So one of the key things we're looking at is we need to make that data accessible to the public, so there's steps to getting access to the data.
And the reason it's not available, I mean, ultimately...
Controlled by
Terranet, and people have been able to find some of the companies, and it's doing research on the companies that can be found. Now, not all of them are going. Some of them will lead from company 123 to company 245, and even Canadian law enforcement is having difficulty tracking through those companies.
James, thanks so much for joining us and providing your insight.
Thanks for having me.
James Cohen, Executive Director of Transparency International Canada.